My name is Dan Finucane, and I'm currently a regent. I love folk music, blues music, and I love singing and playing with other people.
My name is Ian Peoples. I'm a Jesuit regent. I'm kind of a football fanatic. Most of my weekends are spent watching at least a few games. I'm probably one of the biggest Lionel Messi fans. Hello and welcome back to MagisTalk. My name is Ian Peoples and I'm joined by my Jesuit brother and co-host Dan Finucane.
Thanks, Ian. As we've been hinting at and really saying outright in our last few episodes, our time in Belize is running short. And so as a way of marking the near end of our time here, we decided to do an episode where we talk a little bit about prison ministry. We have been preparing a group of lay people from St. Martin de Porres Parish here in Belize City to do prison ministry out at Belize Central. And our hope is that this ministry grows because we really do believe that when we do this kind of ministry, it's not just that we're going there to help people. It's a mutual transformation that takes place.
So today we're going to give you 3 reasons why you should consider doing prison ministry.
And we should say that these 3 reasons are based on an article that Ian wrote that you should check out on Jesuit Post. What's the name of the article?
This link, you should go to prison.
So even though it's
kind of clickbaity, I know.
Yeah.
We were going for that.
But you could do prison ministry whenever.
That's right. Yeah, not only during Lent. Yeah, so if you're interested in that article, we can definitely include that in our Facebook post and our YouTube post as well. So should we get into our 3 reasons?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So Dan, what's our first reason?
So the first reason is because, well, the Bible tells us to.
That's right. That's right. The Bible tells us to. And you might be asking, where does the Bible tell us? Yeah. Well, Matthew chapter 25, the end of the 25th chapter of Matthew, Jesus is as clear as he can be, I think, about the stipulations, the requirements to spend eternal life with God, the requirements to get into heaven. He lays it out very, very clearly. And so let's just talk about what the passage says and then how it impacts us, right? Yeah. So could you share a little bit about what the passage says?
Sure. So Jesus is talking about the Last Judgment. And this is most famously depicted by Michelangelo. You know, they're on one side you have the goats and on the other the sheep.
I don't know if I've seen that painting.
Really?
No, I don't think so.
It's in the Sistine Chapel. It's which is the chapel where popes are elected during the conclave, and I highly encourage you to look it up. It's a beautiful and also kind of terrifying painting, actually, because half of it is people descending into hell. But the main idea is that it's based on this passage, and it's based on the idea of Jesus saying to the sheep, you know, when you did these things for the least, you did it for me. He identifies with the least. And then to the goats, when you didn't do these things for the least, you didn't do them for me. What are those things? Mm-hmm. So these things are often talked of in Catholic circles as the corporal works of mercy. Mm-hmm. And I'll say a couple of them, and then if you want to add the ones I forget.
And then Nicholas, our cameraman, can remind us if we've missed anything.
So feeding the hungry.
Feeding the hungry.
Giving drink to the thirsty. Mm-hmm. Welcoming the stranger. Visiting the prisoner, which is what we're talking about.
Visiting the sick. I think sheltering the homeless and clothing the stranger, or clothing the naked, right? So that's all of them. So, Jesus lays it out very, very clearly. He says explicitly, if you didn't do these things, then you didn't do it for me, right? And I don't think there's anywhere else that Jesus is quite as clear, especially with regards to something as monumental for each of us as the Last Judgment, right? And so so all of these are important, right? Feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, and so on. But we're really honing in on visiting the imprisoned, because I think a lot of those other ones, I think we can almost say that we do them even when we're just helping our families, right? So like if you're a mother or a father, then you've been probably doing this for a long time, giving food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, sheltering the naked, right? And so a lot of these we do sort of naturally. I feel like though, prison ministry, we really have to go out of our way to do, right? It's not as readily available. But we think you should, because I think Dan and I have both been impacted by this ministry, and we think you will be too. So, yeah, when you listen to this passage and think about your ministry, what comes to mind for you, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think of a couple of things. One is I think of a line from Dorothy Day, a famous American Catholic who talked about heaven hinging on these works of mercy. That line comes to mind, and I think what's so interesting is that when Jesus is sharing this parable, he's the people who he's talking to in the parable say, well, like, when did we do these? Both the people who did it and the ones who didn't. That we are often ministering to Christ in disguise, or finding Christ in places where we're not even aware that it's Christ necessarily. And I think that that's really important, especially for prison. You mentioned that prisons it's kind of far away. That's deliberate, I think. That prisons are out of the way. We kind of hide them. We hide people away. And so it does take a little bit more work to go. And I think that hiddenness, going to hidden places, is actually where sometimes we can find Christ in a really profound way. And it often is surprising. I've been surprised many times to talk to somebody who's incarcerated and to find just an incredible faith, for example, or to hear somebody's story and to hear their resilience in the face of having dealt with a lot themselves, but then having made some pretty horrible mistakes and committed some pretty terrible acts. So that's what comes to mind for me. I don't know what for you.
Yeah, I think just reminding myself, that Christ is at the prison, right? And I'll get into this in the next point because it's a tough place to go, and we'll say more about that. But one of the things that I've kind of pictured in spiritual direction with regards to the prison is when I'm, maybe talking to a guy who's in lockdown, right, or somebody who's in kind of isolation, right. And in my prayer, I've pictured Jesus kind of sitting right by the grated cell there, sitting there, right, listening with me to maybe the person that I'm visiting. And when I leave, Jesus doesn't leave. When I leave, Jesus stays right there, right? And he's always accompanying. And yet, so when I come, Jesus then uses me to help these guys feel that presence a bit more. And then, of course, I'm finding Jesus there too. I'm finding Jesus sitting there, right, waiting. And so just an assurance that, Christ is with these people, because, and this gets into the second point a little bit, but I think prison ministry has changed. It's changed me. I know that for sure. And Dan, I'm pretty sure you could say the same, that Definitely. Prison ministry will change you, right? And I think ultimately it's for the better, but that change can be through the process of really encountering really tough stuff. Yeah. For example, I think, I get into this in my article as well, if you want to read that, it's sometimes prison ministry can feel futile or useless, of like, what am I doing here? Mm-hmm. What am I doing here? But I think it's fascinating that even in the midst of encountering that feeling, right, that remaining faithful to God's call to do this kind of ministry, that joy, something like joy, can even break through at a place like a prison. And yeah, so Dan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that aspect of this ministry, the toughness, how difficult it can be, but also the joy that we can find there too, right?
Yeah, I think, to add to that, the difficulty is also seeing how we as a society deal with problems, to put it in kind of a general way. And I don't mean the people as problems. I just mean that if you want to learn about, in this case, Belizean society, a good place to take a snapshot of how we're doing as a society is to go to the prison. And it's eye-opening, it changes you because, and this would be true, I think, anywhere. This would be true in the US, certainly too. You just see what lack of education can do, what poverty, how those things affect people. And of course, people make choices, right? And we're not going to take away from the fact that people do. They act in freedom, but not all choices are as free as others.
Right.
And I think that circumstances, the way that society is set up, can actually make it so that choices are less free. And people can feel pressures that a lot of us don't have to face, or at least we're not going to face quite as readily. So I think that's something that's eye-opening and is important.
And to dig into that a little bit, you're not making this up, right? This like less free aspect. This is actually a part of church teaching with regards to culpability and things have to do with sin, right? Can you just name the three aspects of this culpability? Well, I mean, let's name a couple, right? like culpability is with regards to the situation that
circumstances.
Circumstances, like how free is a person to make a choice, right?
Yeah.
And once I think let's just remain there. I think with this, when you go to these places and you meet people who have experienced these horrible things, situations that they're born into, and you humanize this person who society likes to paint as a villain or as a monster, right?
Yeah.
That you start humanizing these people because you're receiving their story, you're seeing the bigger picture of their lives, not that just this one moment or these series of moments, right? Which again, we don't want to diminish that, bad things have been done, right? But once you start building out the whole story, you recognize that, my gosh, if we really are serious, and we really can empathize, like, I don't know if I would have done differently, in that situation, right? And that's the reality, is that these people, so many of these predominantly men that Dan and I work with, they're in situations that I couldn't say with any certainty that I would be different, right? And I think that's important to recognize that, okay, I'm a sinner, this person is a sinner, and we're both seeking God in our life, right? And so I think that's just important to recognize, and the aspect that it will change you as well. I think just within that, right? Prison ministry has helped me recognize the importance of small acts of love, right? And I think working with you, Dan, has helped me realize that as well, because I remember one time you shared with me with regards to your experience of the Mass. We usually go to Mass in the morning every day before we go out to the prison. And Dan, I remember you sharing with me one time that you're receiving Jesus, right? To go, like you're feeding on Jesus, and in turn you're kind of bringing that Eucharistic experience out to the prison, right? Because at the end of the day at the prison, like we feel like
depleted,
like you described it as like being fed on, right? But how do we do that, right? Well, it's really by like listening, right? Just by giving people the time of day and allowing them to share their stories, but that sort of presence is exhausting as well, right? But those small acts of things that we can discount as not being important, right? Well, it's just, you're just sitting and like listening to someone talk. Well, who else is doing that, right?
Very true.
Yeah.
And I think too, realizing that there are small acts of love that go on at the prison too, among the men and the women there. You know, I think of, there's a guy who, I mentioned once that my aunt had this long-term health problem. And every time I've seen him since, and it's been over a year now, he asks how my aunt is doing. And it's just incredible to me. I'm like, how do you even remember that? Like, you know, it's very moving to me. It's very moving to me. And I think that it's that we are given the opportunity to show love through the very simple but kind of difficult task of listening, and to kind of catch guys in the act of love too sometimes, which I think is important. And it gets at a quote that you have here, you know, from Pope Francis in Joy of the Gospel that I'll just read here, where he says, "If I can help at least one person to have a better life, that already justifies the offering of my life. It's a wonderful thing to be God's faithful people. We achieve fulfillment when we break down walls and our heart is filled with faces and names." And I think that's so true. I think sometimes we want to change the world, you know, but boy, if all we did was help one person and help free that person, to labor with God in helping to free that person, man, what a gift.
Yeah. And I love that last line, you know, that our heart is filled with faces and names.
Yeah.
And I think we all have that, right? We all have faces and names in our hearts of family members, ideally of friends. But then to go back to Matthew 25, you know, the hungry, the thirsty, the sick, and imprisoned, and to have our hearts filled with the faces and names of these kind of people. And it is a great gift. And again, to recognize that if we help transform, you know, or are part of the transformation of one person's life, then like that is a world unto itself, right? That this is a person, and this gets to our third point, but this is a person who God has especially created, right? As we all are. And so I thought we could just share maybe a story of transformation that we experienced at the prison.
Sure.
And I'll jump in first because this is recent. So this is a minor, right? As someone I work with at Wagner's Youth Facility. So I won't say his name, but I'll say his confirmation name because last week he was baptized, he received confirmation, and received First Holy Communion. We'll call him Ignatius. He took Ignatius of Loyola as his confirmation saint. And this young man I've been working with for almost 2 years. So he got there pretty shortly after, or near the end of my first year here. And he's in on a serious charge, right? And so he's been there. And near the beginning, not too long after he got there, he started kind of asking about, you know, the church, right? And then pretty soon he started voicing a desire to become Catholic. And I kept telling him, like, look, I'm not going to be the one that forces this on you, right? Like, if you want this, you have to be the one to come to me. You have to be the one that continually expresses this desire and to sort of do the work of preparing yourself to enter the church. And over the course of the past, year and a half from when he started expressing that desire, he consistently came to me and was expressing it. He wasn't the only one, but he was the most consistent. Like, he's not the only one to have expressed this, but he's the only one during my time here that I feel like has followed through on it. And I think with the others, looking back, I probably, maybe the standards I set for entering, maybe were sometimes a little too high, just to take their desire seriously. But he has done the work, and then last week, Father David from St. Martin de Porres, who we've had on the show, came out and celebrated Mass and Dan was playing music for the Mass, and we just had a couple other guys there who were at Wagner's, and then Ignatius of Loyola was there and came into the church. And so just seeing not only this young man kind of being transformed in his spiritual life and like his desire for God, but I've seen him grow up too. Like he got there, at the age of a little over 15, and he's getting older now. I've seen him literally grow, and so like just see this transformation in the spiritual life. I think, and I pray, and please pray for him as well. Please pray for this young man we'll call Ignatius of Loyola, because I think God is really doing good things in his life, and but it's a rough road ahead. It's a tough road, right? He's going to have to make very difficult decisions, and so please pray that God continues to give him the grace to do that. I don't know if you have any stories that come to mind for you, Dan?
Yeah, I think of one guy, I'm not going to use his name, but who I worked with for over a year. And I say worked with because he was one of the workers in the part of the prison, one of the intern workers. And occasionally he would sit down and we would talk a little bit. But when I first got to the prison, he started around the same time as I did in the rehab center, and asked to talk to me and talked about his desire for forgiveness for the things he had done. And similar to the young man you talked about, he had done some pretty serious, has done some pretty serious things. And so we talked about it, and we, every few weeks, he would say, hey, let's catch up. And there was a day where, he kind of pulled me aside and said, can we talk? I said, of course. And he had gotten a phone call from a friend of his, and the friend had said, hey man, when are you getting out? I said, I'm getting out soon, which soon is relative, but relatively soon. And his friend said to him, well, I just want to let you know, like, people are out for you. People want revenge. And this guy said, he said to me, in that moment, I thought about calling up two of my cousins and having them take this guy out. But if I did that, I would lose the peace and the joy that I found in these last couple of years of my time here in prison, where I've really come to take my faith seriously. He was raised Catholic and has kind of reclaimed his faith in the last couple of years. And then he quoted, the scriptures, the Gospels, don't be, I'm going to butcher the exact quote, but, don't be afraid of those who can kill the body, but be aware, afraid of the one who can kill the soul, and it just, I remember it cut me to the heart, because here's a guy who really understands what that means. He's literally taken the gospel into his life and made it a part of his life, to the point where he's willing to die, at least in that moment, for the sake of his faith and the peace that he's found as a result of that, rather than kind of be a part of this cycle of violence, which is so prevalent here for people who are involved in gangs and in crime. So to me, that's transformation. And, and I pray for him regularly, just because I think it will be difficult when he's released, and there's a very real chance that he could end up killed himself. So I think that
he could end up being killed, you mean?
Yeah, he could end up being killed, and I think that that's a way in which sometimes the Christian life for some of us really is a matter of life and death, And I hope our viewers see that, like, this is heroic virtue. Oh my gosh!
Right?
Yeah.
And this is something we should be praying for every person, right, who's incarcerated, right, who's especially incarcerated maybe for violent offenses or violent charges, and for that kind of heroism, right, to be willing to say, like, I am not going to participate in this violence anymore.
Yeah.
It's nothing. It really is nothing short of heroic, right?
Absolutely, especially because like there isn't much support when you leave to commit to that kind of.
And
life,
even worse, there's an identity that society has imprints on you. Even if you want to give it up, it doesn't mean society. I mean, definitely maybe people who are involved in the streets, you know, they're not going to let you. But even maybe like the good people, right, in society. Right. I say that with quotation marks, like who say, "Oh, that person's been to prison. Right. That's a bad person," right? And even these people might not give these people a second chance, right? But to recognize all of that and yet still decide I'm not going to,
right? Like
I'm not going. That's not my identity anymore, right? And to do something different, heroic.
Yeah. I think it gets at what Paul talks about putting on Christ. Mm-hmm. It's like literally putting on a new identity.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe that translates nicely into the third point, right? Is that right. You will see, if you do this kind of ministry, you'll see that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. Because I know that we have these two truths that can be, you know, that we have to hold in tension when we're out there, right? The truth of, okay, this person, you know, in the case that they're convicted or, you know, that they admit, this person has done terrible things, right? And then the same truth that God loves them and calls me to love them, right? And that God has actually made this person in his image and likeness, right? And this is the source of the inviolable dignity of all people, right? Yeah. That right from the very beginning in the book of Genesis, we read that, you know, in his image and likeness, he created them, right? That all men and women are created in the image and likeness of God. And for that reason, right, that we, you know, that even though these two things are true, right? This person has done terrible things, but yet God loves them, right? And that's a source of hope, I think, for all of us, because for all of us, right, whether it's in our thoughts and in our actions or in the words we speak, like we fall short of really honoring God and one another, right? And to know that God loves, you know, all people, including right, the people who we might label as unlovable, that God calls these people as well. And one way that one example of this, right, from Scripture is the repentant thief, right, the one who was being crucified next to Jesus, and he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus proclaims salvation to this person as he's dying, right, and so all people are loved and called by God.
Yeah, and a couple of things that come to mind for me, you know, one is that being in a place like a prison tests our belief in this. I think sometimes we talk about human dignity and it's very abstract, or it's kind of like, yeah, everybody's got human dignity. But, you know, the challenge is, especially for somebody who maybe has disregarded dignity in other people, to still see human dignity in them. And it's challenging. And yet, I think that's the invitation. And the other is, I'm reminded of something that somebody pointed out to me a long time ago about the prodigal son parable, where, you know, the son, when he comes back and the father embraces him, he has a speech prepared where he's basically saying he wants to give up his sonship because he took he basically says to his father, "I wish you were dead. Give me your money." Mm-hmm. And he's ready to say, you know, just, "I'll be a servant," you know. And the father doesn't even really let him finish the speech. And this person pointed out to me, and then puts the ring on the finger and the robe on. It's not just welcoming back. It's actually saying, "No, I'm clothing you in the clothing of the son," meaning you have responsibility. It's not just that, you know, that I'm welcoming you back. It's also I'm calling you back to who you are. And I think that is a big part of the gift of this kind of ministry, is that saying to somebody, it's the Brian Stevenson line. Brian Stevenson's a lawyer for Equal Justice Initiative in the United States, a great organization, who says, we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. And that more comes from the fact that we're made good, we're made in God's image. And so inviting people back to what that image is, and to say, nothing you've done has gotten rid of that. Nothing you could ever do would get rid of that. Sorry. You're stuck with how God made you. And yet, there's also a recognition, but you also do have to face up to what you've done, because doing so is about recognizing the goodness that's within us, and when we choose against that, seeing what we're missing out on. Yes, we're harming other people, we're harming their goodness too, and we're harming the goodness within ourselves too.
One thing I like to just voice time and again with the guys at Wagner's especially, is that if they allow themselves to be transformed, if they really claim this identity that God has given all of us, right, that their light is going to shine even brighter than maybe mine ever could, because I haven't been to the same depths as them, right? I've compared their experience to coal in mines that becomes diamond because of heat and pressure, right? Well, and they're in the darkness, right? And I think there's an analogous experience to being in a prison. They have to choose that transformation, right? Yeah. They have to choose it. God wills it, right? God's going to give the grace, but God doesn't prevent he doesn't step on our freedom, right? That God's going to give us the freedom to choose. And I think a lot of those guys choose, but also, right, and this is the Christian life, we can help each other choose.
Absolutely.
We can encourage one another into claiming that identity like you're talking about, Dan. And I think that's been a big part of my ministry with the young men in particular, who I think still have a really good or a better chance than a lot of those guys to sort of maybe choose a different life, right? And I look at Mr. William Dawson. Rest in peace. He passed away earlier this year. He was the director at Wagner Jiu-Jitsu facility when I initially got out there. Then he left there, and he was doing great work in the city with the gang-involved people in order to help transform, right, believers in society. But he had been in their shoes, right? He was shot as a young man, he'd been in their shoes. He knew, but then he chose something different, right? Mm-hmm. And his work was transformational, is transformational, right? Continues to be. His example is transformational for guys, and there's a lot of young men who I know right now, and I'm sure you could name men as well, who could be the next William Dawson, or to do this sort of transformational work for beliefs.
Yeah, and I think of we've talked on our show here about the spiritual exercises, and one of the things about the exercises, if you want to boil it down, you can boil it down into many different things, but it's about allowing grace to draw you into greater freedom, and to detach from all of the things that are disordered, or the things that lead us into sin, lead us into shame. And I feel like that's a lot of what the opportunity is that you're describing the prison offers for a lot of guys, is to do that difficult inner work of where, we would use the term disordered attachments, but what are the things in my life that I'm too tied to? What the identity of maybe being a gang member, or of being so attached to shame that I don't feel like I can change at all. I've been so harmed. And over time, I think that the hope is that God's grace can loosen our grip on those things, loosen the grip that those things have on us, and help us to become free to then choose to be that good person that God's made us to be. And it's the most rewarding thing, doing this kind of ministry and seeing that happen, in real time. It doesn't happen every day.
No.
I wish it did. But there's probably a lot of times it's happening and we don't see it.
Right. So, those kind of seeds being planted that are going to grow. And and we got to put our faith in that, right? Because we don't see that immediate transformation all the time, but we trust that God is working, right? That God is always working. So before we get to a final question that we have, we just want to review the 3 reasons real quick. The 3 reasons for doing prison ministry. Jesus tells you to pretty explicitly. So the Bible tells us so. Matthew chapter 25. It's going to change you. It'll transform you, right? We're going there to serve people, but we in turn are transformed when we listen to Jesus, right? And we serve Jesus in these ways, right? Especially visiting the imprisoned. And also you'll see that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, and that nothing changes that, right? That's you can't take that away, right?
And if you're interested in prison ministry, we would recommend getting in touch with Father Andres at St. Martin's, and he can put you in touch with the people who are in charge of the ministry there. But there's other parishes that are starting to look into doing some
I know
ministry
Divine Mercy has been out, and I think Holy Redeemer is interested as well. So we just keep praying for this work, and if you want to get involved, definitely reach out to Father Andres, and hopefully these lay leaders that we're have been working with, that this is going to grow, right? We're giving the reins to them, and the Holy Spirit is going to do what the Holy Spirit does. Yeah. So our final question. And this is a big one, but I mean, we're both coming to the end of our time. I'm in this, as we're recording this is my last week going out to the prison. But Dan, what are you going to miss most about Belize Central Prison?
I'm thinking of like funny things that I won't miss, like the food. But I think, it really does boil down to the people. And I think a lot of it is, I hear a lot of things. A lot of them are very sad and difficult, but there's also a lot of laughter, and there's a lot of ways in which there's a camaraderie that I've had the real gift of getting to be a part of in small ways. And so I'm going to miss just kind of laughing with guys, because I think there's something about it. It's such a tedious, kind of humorless place in a lot of ways. So to laugh in the midst of that kind of feels like we're being a little subversive, like we're not supposed to laugh in here. But I think that they're just funny things that are part of life. And I've had to learn, that there's real joy to be found in, being this like random foreign white guy coming in to a prison setting here in Belize, and the way in which cultures clash. It's just funny sometimes. So I'm gonna miss those interactions, and particularly I think, on a more serious note, the guys who I've had a chance to accompany over many, many weeks and months. They will certainly, we mentioned in the quote earlier from Pope Francis, those names and faces will definitely not be leaving me anytime soon. So how about for you?
Yeah, definitely the young men at Wagner's, and at least probably half of the 20 or so, more than half have been there for more than a year. So I've gotten to know these guys pretty well, and I think just again, one of the things that I really lean into in regards to my work is just making sure I show these guys respect, and recognizing when I don't, maybe the times that I've maybe gotten frustrated with them or something, and said something that I felt bad about, like making sure I apologize, just to show them that I respect you, right? And giving them something hopefully to imitate in that sense too, right?
Sure.
But I think, just I've grown to love these guys, right? And I think just kind of honing in, like something as simple as playing soccer with them, right? And not even like a game, but just juggling, right? Like the other day I was with one of the guys who's been there the whole time I've been there. and we were juggling back and forth, and we were trying to get to 10, and we ended up getting to 50, right? Like a back and forth passes in the air without touching the ground. He's not that great of a football player, which I think he would recognize, but he's gotten a lot better since I've been there. And again, something so simple as like keeping a ball up in the air, right? Which is like, it's a childlike activity. It's just playing for the sake of playing. And I think, at those moments where I get to see sort of the kid in these young men who've unfortunately their experiences have caused them to sort of lose that childlike sense, but to see it reclaimed just for those moments of like keeping a ball up in the air is something that I really miss and value. Something as simple as that, right? Because in those moments, it's easy to forget everything else, right? And you're just concentrated on this very fun thing of keeping a soccer ball up in the air. So that's something that, just those simple moments is something that I'll really miss.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Yes.
And thanks for writing the article that inspired our episode today.
Yeah, I'm glad we could kind of transform it into an episode, a MagisTalk episode. Yeah.
Absolutely. So check out that article. We'll have a link available for you. And we have 3 more episodes.
Wow.
3 more episodes. So please stick with us for those last 3. We look forward to being with you. And until next time, we'll see you.
Bye, y'all.